The city was a beast that never slept, its veins pulsing with neon light and the low growl of engines prowling the streets. Power was traded in whispers, loyalty bought with blood, and betrayal punished with fire. In this world, love was not a gift, it was a weapon. Elena Rossi knew this better than anyone. Born into a family bound by the Mafia's code, she had spent her life trying to escape the shadows, sketching dreams of freedom in notebooks no one ever saw. But freedom was a luxury her bloodline could never afford. Adrian Moretti was the kind of man whose name carried weight heavier than bullets. Heir to the Moretti Empire, his reputation was carved in fear, his silence more dangerous than any threat. When Elena first saw him, it was in the ruins of a deal gone wrong, the air thick with gunpowder and the marble floor stained crimson. He shielded her without hesitation, not out of duty but instinct, and in that moment she realized danger had a face, and it was devastatingly beautiful. Their connection was a fire that refused to be extinguished. Every glance was a risk, every touch a crime. Adrian warned her, his voice low and sharp, that she did not belong in his world, that his enemies would make her their weapon, and his love would be her curse. But Elena could not walk away. The pull was too strong, the hunger too deep. She found herself drawn into his empire, into the clubs where money flowed like liquor, into alleys where betrayal was written in blood, into penthouses where passion burned hotter than the city lights. The Rossi and Moretti families had been rivals for decades, their feud etched into the bones of the city. Their union was forbidden, a spark that could ignite war. Yet the more dangerous it became, the more intoxicating their love grew. Adrian's empire demanded loyalty, Elena's heart demanded devotion, and somewhere between the two she realized she was no longer innocent. She was becoming what she feared most, a queen in a kingdom built on ashes. Bodies began to fall, each death a warning, each betrayal a reminder that love in this world was a battlefield. Friends turned into traitors, the FBI circled like vultures, and whispers of war spread through the streets. Elena held secrets that could destroy her family, stood at crossroads where every choice meant blood, and still she chose Adrian. One night, as sirens wailed in the distance, he pressed a gun into her hand, his eyes burning with a truth she could no longer deny. If she stayed, she would need it. Her fingers trembled, but she did not let go. Their love was not tender, it was not safe. It was a vow written in crimson, a promise whispered in gunfire, a bond forged in shadows. Every kiss carried the weight of danger, every embrace the certainty of ruin. Yet they clung to each other, knowing that in a world where loyalty was fragile and power was fleeting, their love was the only thing real. The city watched as the Rossi girl and the Moretti heir defied the rules, their passion igniting a storm that threatened to consume everything. It was not a fairy tale, not a story of happily ever after. It was a descent into fire, a love story that could only end in domination or destruction. And as the night swallowed them whole, Elena understood the truth. She had not fallen in love with Adrian Moretti. She had fallen in love with the danger, the darkness, the thrill of standing at the edge of ruin and choosing to leap. The city was restless, its streets humming with secrets that could kill a man before dawn. Elena moved through it like a ghost, her heart tethered to Adrian even as the world around them threatened to collapse. Every meeting was a risk, every whispered word a betrayal waiting to be uncovered. Yet she could not resist him. His presence was a storm, his touch a promise of ruin, and she had already surrendered to the fire. Adrian's empire was built on fear. Men bowed to him, not because they respected him, but because they knew what happened to those who didn't. He had inherited the Moretti name, but he had carved his own legend in blood. Elena saw the darkness in him, the violence that lived in his veins, but she also saw the man beneath, the one who carried scars like chains, the one who looked at her as if she were the only light left in a world of shadows. Their love was forbidden, a union that could ignite war between families who had spilled each other's blood for decades. The Rossi clan whispered that Elena had betrayed them, that she had chosen lust over loyalty. The Moretti soldiers warned Adrian that she would be his downfall, that no woman was worth the empire he commanded. But neither of them listened. They were too far gone, too entangled in a passion that burned hotter than the city itself. The nights grew darker. Enemies closed in. A rival family began circling, hungry for weakness, and Elena became the target. Anonymous threats slipped beneath her door, shadows followed her through the streets, and one evening a bullet shattered the window of her apartment, missing her by inches. Adrian's fury was unrelenting. He hunted the men responsible, and when he found them, the city learned once again why the Moretti name was feared. But violence bred violence, and soon the FBI tightened its grip, circling Adrian's empire like wolves. Wiretaps, raids, informants, every move was watched, every word recorded. Elena found herself caught between two worlds, the family she had been born into and the man she had chosen. Secrets weighed heavy on her chest, and she began to wonder if love could survive in a world where trust was a luxury no one could afford. Adrian gave her a choice one night, his voice low, his eyes burning with a truth she could not escape. Stay with him, and she would become part of his empire, a queen in a kingdom built on ashes. Leave, and she could return to the life she had once dreamed of, a life of art and freedom untouched by blood. Her hands trembled as she reached for him, but she did not let go. She had already chosen. From that moment, Elena was no longer a bystander. She was part of the story, part of the war, part of the empire. She learned to read the language of power, to navigate the labyrinth of betrayal, to stand beside Adrian when enemies came with guns and knives and promises of destruction. She became his confidant, his weakness, his strength. And in the quiet hours, when the city slept and the world outside was chaos, she became his salvation. But salvation in the Mafia was fleeting. Every kiss carried the weight of danger, every embrace the certainty of ruin. Their love was not tender, it was not safe. It was a vow written in crimson, a promise whispered in gunfire, a bond forged in shadows. The city watched as the Rossi girl and the Moretti heir defied the rules, their passion igniting a storm that threatened to consume everything. It was not a fairy tale. It was a descent into fire, a love story that could only end in domination or destruction. And as the night swallowed them whole, Elena understood the truth. She had not simply fallen in love with Adrian Moretti. She had fallen in love with the danger, the darkness, the thrill of standing at the edge of ruin and choosing to leap. The city was tightening its grip, every alley echoing with whispers of betrayal. Elena Rossi had become more than a forbidden lover. She was now a symbol, a spark that threatened to ignite war between families who had hated each other for generations. The Rossi clan saw her as a traitor, the Moretti Empire saw her as a risk, and yet Adrian Moretti saw her as the only truth left in a world built on lies. Their nights together were fire and steel, passion tangled with danger. Every kiss carried the weight of enemies watching, every embrace the certainty that someone, somewhere, wanted them dead. Adrian's empire was bleeding. Rivals circled like sharks, the FBI pressed harder, and even his own men began to question his judgment. But Adrian was relentless. He had built his name on fear, and he would not let anyone take what was his. Elena learned quickly that love in the Mafia was not soft, it was survival. She sat in rooms where deals were made with guns on the table, listened to conversations where betrayal was measured in dollars and blood, and watched men fall because they underestimated the power of desire. She became Adrian's confidant, his shadow, his queen. And in the quiet hours, when the city's chaos faded into silence, she became his salvation. But salvation was fragile. One night, a Rossi soldier was found dead, his body left in the open as a message. The Rossi family blamed Adrian, and war erupted. Streets turned into battlefields, loyalty fractured, and Elena found herself standing at the center of a storm she could no longer escape. Her brothers called her a traitor, her father disowned her, and the Moretti soldiers whispered that she was the reason blood was spilling faster than ever. Adrian held her close, his voice steady even as the world burned. They'll come for us, he said. They'll come for you, but I won't let them take you. His promise was a blade, sharp and dangerous, and Elena knew it could cut them both. The war escalated. Bombs in cars, bullets in alleys, betrayals in boardrooms. The FBI circled tighter, offering deals to anyone willing to turn. Adrian's empire began to fracture, and Elena saw the toll it took on him. The sleepless nights, the scars that never healed, the weight of carrying a kingdom built on ashes. Yet he never faltered. He fought for her, for them, for a love that had become more dangerous than any enemy. And then came the night when everything changed. A meeting arranged in secret, a promise of peace between the Rossi and Moretti families. Elena begged Adrian to trust it, to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could heal what blood had broken. But the meeting was a trap. Gunfire erupted, chaos swallowed the room, and Elena found herself holding the weapon Adrian had once pressed into her hand. Her fingers trembled, but she did not let go. When the smoke cleared, bodies lay scattered, and Adrian stood bleeding, his eyes locked on hers. "This is what love costs," he whispered, his voice raw. "This is the price we pay." Elena realized then that there was no escape, no freedom, no fairy tale waiting beyond the fire. Their love was a vow written in crimson, a promise carved into the bones of the city. It would not end in peace. It would not end in forgiveness. It would end in domination or destruction, and she had already chosen her side. The city watched as the Rossi girl and the Moretti heir defied the rules, their passion igniting a storm that consumed everything. And as the night swallowed them whole, Elena understood the truth. She had not simply fallen in love with Adrian Moretti. She had fallen in love with the danger, the darkness, the thrill of standing at the edge of ruin and choosing to leap. The war consumed the city. Streets that once pulsed with neon now echoed with gunfire. Alleys became graves, and every whispered deal carried the weight of betrayal. Elena Rossi had become more than a forbidden lover. She was the queen of Adrian Moretti's empire, bound to him by passion and blood. But the crown was heavy, and every day it threatened to crush her. The Rossi clan declared her a traitor, her own brothers swearing vengeance. The Moretti soldiers questioned her loyalty, whispering that she was the reason their empire bled. And yet Adrian stood unshaken, his fury a storm that tore through anyone who dared to threaten her. He had built his name on fear, but for Elena, he would burn the city itself. The FBI tightened its grip, circling closer with every raid, every wiretap, every deal offered to men desperate to save themselves. Rival families struck from the shadows, bombs in cars, bullets in crowded streets, knives in the dark. And through it all, Elena stood beside Adrian, her hands no longer trembling, her heart no longer innocent. She had become what she feared most, a woman forged in fire, a queen in a kingdom of ashes. One night, as the city burned with whispers of betrayal, Adrian brought her to the rooftop of his penthouse. The skyline glowed like a battlefield, and his voice was low, steady, dangerous. "They'll come for us," he said. "They'll come for you, but I won't let them take you." His promise was a blade, sharp and merciless, and Elena knew it could cut them both. The final betrayal came from within. A man Adrian had trusted since childhood sold him to the FBI, trading loyalty for survival. The raid was swift, brutal, and merciless. Sirens wailed, helicopters thundered overhead, and soldiers stormed the building. Adrian fought like a man possessed, every bullet a vow, every strike a promise. Elena stood beside him, the gun he had once pressed into her hand now steady, her aim true. Blood stained the marble floors, smoke filled the air, and the empire crumbled around them. Adrian was wounded, his strength fading, but his eyes never left hers. "This is what love costs," he whispered, his voice raw, his breath shallow. "This is the price we pay." Elena held him as the city roared, as enemies closed in, as the world demanded their destruction. She understood then that there was no escape, no freedom, no fairy tale waiting beyond the fire. Their love was not tender, It was not safe. It was a vow written in crimson, a promise carved into the bones of the city. It would not end in peace. It would not end in forgiveness. It would end in domination or destruction, and she had already chosen her side. The sirens grew louder, the footsteps closer, the empire collapsing into dust. Elena pressed her lips to Adrian's, tasting blood and fire, and whispered the only truth that mattered. If we burn together. And as the night swallowed them whole, the city understood the legend it had birthed. The Rossi girl and the Moretti heir had defied the rules, ignited a war, and carved their love into history. It was not a story of happily ever after. It was a descent into fire, a love story that ended in ashes. The city did not mourn them. When the empire fell in fire and blood, when Adrian Moretti's name was whispered as legend and Elena Rossi's love was cursed as betrayal, the streets simply moved on. But Elena did not die in the ashes. She rose from them, scarred and hardened, carrying the weight of a vow that had been written in crimson. Adrian's death was not the end, it was the beginning. The Rossi clan believed they had rid themselves of her. The Moretti soldiers thought the empire had crumbled, and the FBI marked her as collateral damage in a war they had orchestrated. But Elena had learned too much, seen too much, become too much to simply vanish. She carried Adrian's legacy in her veins, his fire in her heart, and his empire in her hands. The underworld underestimated her. They saw her as a lover, a pawn, a woman broken by grief. But grief was a weapon, and Elena wielded it with precision. She rebuilt quietly, gathering the remnants of Adrian's loyal men, forging alliances with those who had once feared him, and turning enemies into reluctant partners. She moved through the city like a shadow, her presence felt but never seen, her name whispered in back rooms where power was traded like blood. The Rossi family tried to erase her, sending soldiers to finish what they had started. But Elena was no longer the girl who trembled with a gun in her hand. She was steel, fire, and vengeance. One by one, her brothers fell, their loyalty to the clan shattered by the blade of her resolve. Her father, once the man who had sworn to protect her, became her enemy, and when he looked into her eyes, he saw not his daughter, but the queen of the ashes. The FBI circled tighter, desperate to crush the empire before it rose again. They underestimated her, believing she was driven only by love, by grief, by passion. But Elena was driven by something far more dangerous, purpose. She had seen what power could do, what love could destroy, and she had chosen to wield both. She played their game, feeding them lies, turning their informants, and using their own desperation against them. And then came the rivals. Families who had once feared Adrian now tested Elena, sending emissaries with promises of peace and knives hidden beneath their coats. She welcomed them, listened to their words, and when they betrayed her, she answered with fire. The city learned quickly that Elena Rossi was not a pawn, not a lover, not a victim. She was a ruler, and her reign was carved in blood. Her nights were haunted by Adrian's memory, his voice echoing in the silence, his touch lingering in the shadows. She carried him with her, not as a weakness, but as a weapon. Every decision was a tribute, every victory a vow, every act of vengeance a promise fulfilled. She had not simply loved Adrian Moretti, she had become him, and in becoming him, she had surpassed him. The city bent to her will, the Rossi clan crumbled, the FBI faltered, and the rivals bowed. Elena stood at the center of it all, her empire rebuilt, her throne forged in fire. She was no longer the girl who had dreamed of freedom, no longer the woman who had trembled at the edge of ruin. She was the queen of the underworld, the legend whispered in alleys and boardrooms, the shadow that ruled the city. And yet, in the quiet hours, when the world outside was chaos and her empire demanded blood, she still felt the weight of Adrian's promise. "This is what love costs," he had whispered. "This is the price we pay." She carried that truth with her, knowing that her reign was not eternal, that every empire eventually burned, that every love story ended in ashes. But until that day came, Elena Rossi would rule. She would fight, she would burn, she would love in the only way the Mafia allowed, with danger, with darkness, with fire. And the city would remember her not as the girl who betrayed her family, not as the lover who cursed an empire, but as the queen who rose from the ashes and carved her legend into the bones of the streets. The city bent to Elena Rossi's will, but power was never permanent. Her empire stretched across the skyline, her name whispered in boardrooms and alleys alike, her shadow cast over every deal made in smoke-filled rooms. She had risen from the ashes, carved her throne in blood, and ruled with a fire that no rival dared challenge. But the underworld was restless, and the streets hungered for change. A new family emerged, younger, hungrier, ruthless in ways even Adrian Moretti had never been. They were led by a man named Luca Vitali, a ghost from Adrian's past, a soldier who had once sworn loyalty but vanished when the empire fell. Luca returned with ambition burning in his veins, promising to tear down the old order and build something new. He spoke of Elena not as a queen, but as a relic, a woman clinging to a love story that had already ended. The city listened. Soldiers defected, allies wavered, and whispers spread that Elena's reign was nearing its end. But Elena was no stranger to betrayal. She had built her empire on the bones of men who underestimated her, and she would not surrender it to a ghost. She moved through the city with precision, striking at Luca's allies, dismantling his networks, reminding the underworld that she was not a relic. She was the fire that had survived the ashes. Yet Luca was different. He did not fight with fear alone, he fought with vision. He offered the city something Elena could not, a future unbound by the past, a world where power was not inherited but seized. And the younger generation listened, drawn to his promise of change. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her, the empire she had rebuilt trembling as loyalty fractured. The FBI saw opportunity in the chaos. They circled tighter, feeding Luca information, hoping to use him as a weapon to finally destroy Elena. But Elena was no pawn. She turned their game against them, feeding them lies, twisting their traps, and using their desperation to fuel her own war. The final confrontation came not in a boardroom or an alley, but in the ruins of the theater where she had first met Adrian. The burned walls whispered of forgotten tragedies, the air thick with smoke and memory. Luca stood before her, his soldiers at his back, his voice steady and sharp. "Your time is over," he said. "The city doesn't need a queen of ashes. It needs a king of fire." Elena's eyes burned with fury, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you can erase me? You think you can erase him? Adrian's blood built this city. My love carved it into stone. You are nothing but a shadow." Gunfire erupted. Chaos swallowed the room, and the empire trembled. Elena fought with the precision of a queen who had nothing left to lose, every bullet a vow, every strike a promise. Luca matched her, his fury relentless, his ambition unshaken. The city held its breath as two legends clashed, love and ambition colliding in fire and blood. When the smoke cleared, the theater was silent. Bodies lay scattered, the air heavy with the weight of destiny. Elena stood wounded but unbroken, her eyes locked on Luca. He was bleeding, his strength fading, but his voice carried the truth of his ambition. "You can kill me," he whispered, "but you cannot kill the future." Elena raised her weapon, her heart heavy, her soul burning. She understood then that her reign was not eternal, that every empire eventually fell, that every love story ended in ashes. But she also understood that legends were not erased. They were written in blood, carved into the bones of the city, remembered long after the fire burned out. She pulled the trigger. The city roared, the empire trembled, and Elena Rossi's name was etched into history. She was not a relic, not a pawn, not a victim. She was the queen who rose from the ashes, the woman who defied the rules, the lover who carved her vow into the streets. Her reign ended not in surrender, but in fire. Her love story, not in peace, but in destruction. And as the night swallowed her whole, the city understood the truth. Elena Rossi was not simply a queen. She was the legend of the underworld, the shadow that ruled the streets, the fire that burned until the very end.